Progress.
Well, hello, everybody. It's good to have you on today. We are going to get started here with today's session. I just want to begin with some feedback that we got this week. And one of the participants here talked about how this phone call, this Zoom, how transformative it became for him and what he's experiencing on the call. So I'm really, really grateful. This is just one of many comments we get on what is taking place here on the U.S. Kingdom Conversation. I really believe we're growing, we're expanding, more is being added to what is being done. Grateful for Andy being with us today. I want you to continue to keep him in your prayers for his strength and well-being. He's an important voice that we need to have here. And I just want to remind you, as you know, we don't have a grace like Andy around, a voice so needed for him to be around. Let's support him and undergird him in prayer. So it's good to have him on this week. And for each of you, it's good to see so many of you all that we've missed over the past couple of weeks. Good to have you back. So without any further ado, we're going to invite Andy to the mic. Andy, the mic is yours if you're ready. Good morning.
Yeah, man. Good morning. Good afternoon. Wherever in the world you are and what time it is in your space. Let me welcome you to this conversation this afternoon in this side of the world. I think we've been having some absolutely incredible interactions. People who fail to join the meeting, they are getting the audio, and we've been sending out also the PowerPoint alongside the audio. And so I'm hoping that you are not just listening and enjoying, but you are very deliberate in imbibing, holding it, and making it yours. Why is that so important? If this does not become yours, then you are doing nothing more than regurgitating another person's insight. There's in the book of Malachi, the Bible talks about people bringing that which was stolen. Stolen means it is not yours. You basically hijacked it from somebody else. And while I do not put a copyright on anything that God has shown me, I think that it is important that in order for you to take what you hear on this conversation, whether it be from me, from Frederick, from anybody who speaks, it is critically important that you don't just go and rehash it, just almost like echo the statements, but what you want is to take it, grasp it, internalize it, as I said before, imbibe it, make it yours so that when you speak it, it is not just an empty echo, but it flows out of the very innermost dimensions of your own heart and life. And so I have no problem in you speaking this and sharing it in any other context. I have no problems there at all. What I would want, however, is that you become a voice and not an echo. Make it yours. Do not steal it. Don't do the Malachi thing. Present that which is stolen, meaning you just hijacked it and went and regurgitated it and want to take credit for it. So make it yours. The reason why I have no problems in people taking it and declaring it is because the truth is we've all taken what Paul spoke. We are all rehearsing and looking at and understanding things that Paul spoke, understanding things that other people spoke. And the critical thing is that we have made it ours. We've discovered it for ourselves. We've grasped it for ourselves. And so it's no longer us just regurgitating stuff that Paul and David and Moses said, but these are things that have now anchored themselves into our own spirits and hearts. And so we could speak it very, very authoritatively. Last week we had, I think, a very, very incredible session. Let me kind of share my screen here. What I want to do today is I will not get into the substance of today's presentation. I really would like to continue, but there's some other things that's on my mind. So let me share my screen, jump in here. And let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Good,
Yes.
you can see my screen. Okay, I'm going to repeat some of the things I said last week, the latter part of it. Then I want to continue. But before we continue, there's just a little area I want us to have a general conversation on, all of us to kind of involve ourselves. Last week, we were talking about, we're still speaking about the issues of dominion. We are redefining it. We are looking at it again, because as I said in some of the earlier presentations, there's been so many abuses, and people still go back to Genesis 1:26, and they don't see the aspects of government. They don't see the aspects of exercising God's authority from God's perspective. They do not see the benevolent side of our rulership. They don't see those sides at all. What they see is almost like a reckless take control and a reckless kind of execute dominion. And we sometimes miss the critical sides inside of it. I spent some time and I showed you historically where the concept of dominion, where it was abused, and the collateral damage that came from the abuse of the concept. And so in my defining dominion, I'm going to spend, I think I will do about another 4 sessions on this so that we could really drill into it and bring some principles out. And I'll tell you this, these presentations are far more beneficial to me than they are to you, because it really encourages me to dig deeper, to search more profoundly, and to discover concepts that I am very, very deliberate in trying to keep very, very close to my heart before I declare them to you. So let me rehearse a couple of things. The whole issue of distinctiveness being inseparable to dominion. You see that word is distinctiveness? I want you to hold that closely, because I'm going to say a couple of things today in expanding on the concept of distinctiveness. This is what the Daniel, this was the concern of Daniel when he went to his guys after he got word that Nebuchadnezzar wanted to kill all the wise people in Babylon. Now, remember I said that Daniel was numbered among, or he was considered from the Babylonian perspective as being in the same category as the wise men, the gurus inside of Babylon, the thinkers, the architects and the designers of the current age and day. And so when we speak about the wise men, you're not just talking about somebody who has some level of articulation. They were like the architects of what life was in those days. And so it was important that Babylon saw Daniel as being in the very same category. These men had the ability to track trends, to understand where things are going, to interpret the internal configuration of societies. They knew how to define contemporary society and to design a quality of life that was consistent with contemporary existence. And those things are very important because it expands our concept of what a wise man was. So when Nebuchadnezzar made a decree that he will kill all the wise men in Babylon, because Nebuchadnezzar thought that these guys were not sincere. He was convinced that they did not have the level of insight that they claimed to have, because they could not, number one, tell Nebuchadnezzar what he dreamed, and equally interpret the dream. And so Daniel went back to his guys, and this is Daniel chapter 2, 17 to 19. And listen, then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. And I like that word companion. That's an important word. When we get back to the whole issue of the collaborative component of dominion, because we said last week that when God made man, he said, let them have dominion. Dominion is a collaborative exercise. But collaboration is a key word, but it's not an abject, arbitrary kind of operation. Daniel went back to his guys and they were designated companions. Those of you who are students of the Hebrew or Greek, or in this particular context, you understand that Daniel, the book of Daniel, was not written in in Hebrew, it was written Amharic. And so if you go back and look at this word companion, you'd realize that this is not just a casual expression. The word almost describes an individual who is joined to you, connected to you, deeply linked to you, almost like a twin. So when you speak about collaboration, it's not an arbitrary exercise. You need to identify those who occupy your west wing. That's the term that I've used for quite a while. You don't collaborate with any and everybody, because what you'll find yourself doing is being pulled in all kinds of different directions, and you will invest a lot of time in trying to arrive at a conclusion, and at the end, you don't arrive at any conclusion. And that's an exercise in stupidity if you join yourself to the wrong people in order to think into a particular strategic end. And so Daniel went back to his companions, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, that they might seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning the secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men in Babylon. Take note of the highlighted area. And the highlighted area will identify the emphasis. So Daniel went back to his companions, and this was his concern, that they might seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning the secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. What is the point there? The interpretation of the dream was linked to Daniel's commitment to maintain distinctiveness. In other words, God, give us insight into this dream so that we won't be numbered among everybody else. We won't be seen as just mixing among everybody else. Give us a sense of distinction. Allow us to see what is embedded inside of what you showed Nebuchadnezzar, because we are not like the average wise man in Babylon. We are distinct, we are unique. The point is, the interpretation of the dream was linked to Daniel's commitment to distinctiveness. Daniel and his team, they were more concerned about distinction and less concerned about interpretation. And that's important. Interpretation was secondary to distinction. The decree of death had gone out, and Daniel's position is, we should not be numbered among those assigned to die. And the point I made last week is that, listen, whether it be a pandemic, whether it be diseases and cancer, God literally had ordained that his people should live in a zone of distinction. None of the diseases that come upon the Egyptians will come upon you. Those words are clearly stated. When Israel came out of Egypt, God did not even allow a dog to growl at them in order to establish that these are my people. God gave them laws that were superior to all the other laws. God came close to Israel. He was very proximate to Israel in order to establish the fact that you are different, you are distinct, and you are unique. The problem is, most of the church, we've settled for just blending in. We've settled for just kind of losing ourselves inside of the system. We've settled for becoming almost like a mushroom. A mushroom has no distinct flavor. It takes on the flavor of whatever it is tossed into. And most of us have become like mushrooms. And I can expand on that definition of mushrooms, because mushrooms, basically, it is produced in the dark and it lives off an extraordinary amount of excretion. And so if you think about the concept or the image or the allegory of us becoming like mushrooms and just taking on the flavor of whatever we tossed into, not creating a sense of distinction, you'll understand I'm talking about a lot more than just losing ourselves. We must be able to reassume that sense of distinctiveness, because that's where our authority is at. I quoted this a while ago. This is God. I quoted this as well, where God said, which other nation has laws like you? Now, in looking at the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, we drilled into this dream only to identify one critical point. I said last week, I'm not going to concern myself with the eschatology. We may at some point look at it in a particular light, and there's something that I'm discovering in this by looking at it, and we're going to talk about that possibly next week. The significance of these 10 toes. We'll talk about that next week, but again, not in an eschatological context. Now, we looked at this image, and this was what Nebuchadnezzar saw. He saw this image, and we talked about it. We saw the head of gold that speaks to Babylon, the chest and arm of silver that speaks to the blending of Medes and the Persians. We saw the legs of iron, which speaks to Greece, the chest and the legs of iron. We talked about the Roman Empire, and we looked at the mixture of the iron and the clay. Now, it's quite interesting. All of these precious metals, as it were, quite interesting. And the issue of a stone cut out without human hands and the language used by Nebuchadnezzar or used by Daniel to describe this image. In one translation, it says, you saw this great statue. And he said, you saw this great statue standing before you. And he used two different Amharic words to describe great. He said this thing was excellent. And all of the words used by Daniel in the Amharic language describes an image that has external beauty, but hollow in the inside. And that's the nature of the Babylonian system. That's the nature of the systems of the world. It's attractive on the outside, but it's very hollow in the inside. It is not impregnable. It is not full of substance. But when compared with the systems of the kingdom is described as a rock that became a huge mountain. Mountain in scripture always speaks of impregnability. And so while the rock that grew or became a large mountain does not have as much external appeal, what it has is internal impregnability. And that's important because this is what Nebuchadnezzar saw. And however you look at it, it has a certain level of external appeal. It appeals to the optics. It has external attractiveness. A rock cut out from a mountain, hitting this image and growing into a large mountain doesn't seem to have much appeal. But the appeal of the kingdom is not in its optics. It is in its internal construct. And that's a critical part of how we must build it. And there are two things about the nature of the kingdom that you see in the rock cut out without human hands. Several things, but two of them stand out to me. Next week, we're going to drill into most of them. One is that this kingdom is not built by brutal human force. The rock was cut out without human hands. The kingdom is not built by the brute human force. And so a lot of what passes for kingdom initiatives in the form of Christian nationalism and in the form of the warped perspective of the kingdom, it is the antithesis of what Nebuchadnezzar saw. What Nebuchadnezzar saw is a kingdom exerting its influence in the earth, a rock cut out without human hands. It was not enforced by human ideology, by human opinion, by the brute force of your flesh and the brute force of your carnality. It does not depend on the brute force of your carnality to exert its influence. The other thing about this kingdom that Nebuchadnezzar saw is this, that it builds itself in the earth according to the very thing it came out of. It builds itself in the earth and it becomes the very thing from which it came. Let me say that again. It became the very thing from which it came out of. Remember, this rock was cut out from a mountain and it itself became a large mountain. Means that it is not just existing in an arbitrary manner. There is a preset template. There's a preset architecture. There's a preset design that this kingdom is working with. And whether it exists in Indonesia, in America, in Jamaica, or Trinidad, it exists according to a preset architecture. This thing has nothing to do with what is existent in your brain or what is existent inside of your culture or your patriotism to your own nationalistic disposition. The nature of the kingdom is this. It will only build itself according to its preset design. It came out from a mountain and it becomes a mountain. It came out of a mountain and it becomes a mountain. The third very important characteristic about the kingdom that Nebuchadnezzar saw, as I said earlier, it has no external appeal, as it were. It has internal impregnability. It became a large mountain. Mountains always speak of immovability and impregnability. This is a rock cut out without human hands becoming a large mountain. Those are three important little concepts that we have to understand in looking at, in interpreting, and in building kingdom initiatives in the earth. But this is what Nebuchadnezzar saw. Last week, we kind of described this entire image and looked at some of its unique characteristics. And in looking at these characteristics, we were describing the characteristics and the features of worldly systems. And the concern that we had last week is this: if our concept of the kingdom, it is a mirror image of what Nebuchadnezzar saw, then we are not building a kingdom, a God's kingdom entity. We are building something that is everything but the kingdom of God. We are engaged in something that is contrary to the kingdom of God while we are assuming that we are doing something for God. These are the fundamental characteristics that are embedded inside of this image. Nebuchadnezzar saw an image that looked like this, a man standing in front of him. What he saw was this. What are the basic characteristics? We call this image the authentic form of inauthenticity. And we're going to describe why we described it as such in a latter session. The authentic form of inauthenticity. Embedded in this design, you would see the following. Number one, humanism, deeply embedded in this design. Secondly, we talk about anthropocentricity. Anthropocentricity, that's a nice word. Don't get entangled by it. It is different from humanism. Anthropocentricity basically says that man is at the center of what is emerging in the earth. They are the designers, they are the architects, they are the central figure in the culture and the prevailing characteristics of the time. Man is shaping it. Anthropocentricity basically says not God, but man is at the center of the whole operation. It's different from humanism. It is a man-driven ideal. Humanism is entirely different. Anthropocentricity is embedded in this design. Thirdly, chameleon it's chameleon in nature, meaning it changes, it's different, it has different features, it changes its complexion, changes its dynamic, changes its emphasis. You'd realize it starts with a head of gold and it ends with feet of iron and clay, very chameleon in its nature. Next, we talk about it is Nicolatan in its operation. You'd realize the head of gold and the foot is made of iron and clay, meaning that there's nothing in the feet that is found in the head, that the two parts are completely opposite. And if you are building, ask yourself to what extent are these principles embedded in what you are building and how you're building. It's very Nicolatan in nature. Next, we said it's Frankenstein in nature, very Frankenstein. And so it has a head of gold, chest and arm of silver, belly and thighs of bronze. Frankenstein describes the stitching together of parts without a central DNA. What you have is a monster. What you have is an aberration. And the systems of the world is more a monstrosity than it is an entity. The thing is, it has all of these embedded parts thrown together, disparate parts stitched together to create this image. It is not one consistent stream. It is all of these different parts stitched together to create this humanistic model. Next, we talk about it being Procrustean. Procrustean is a nice concept, and Procrustean deals with almost like a one-size-fits-all. It's like forcing you to become something that is defined already in front of your gaze. Now, that's an interesting word. And again, we're going to describe this word Procrustean. We talked about it last week, but I think it's such a word. It's another word that we have to kind of lean into and understand. And not finally, we talked about being top-heavy. All of the values at the top, very esoteric in nature. And finally, we said it is depreciative, meaning that it goes down in value from a head of gold all the way down to a foot of iron and clay. And these are the characteristic of worldly systems. Question is, to what extent are these the characteristics and features of your own existence, of the systems that you are building, the churches that you are designing, the networks that you are constructing? To what extent are these features embedded in what you are calling kingdom? We looked at each of these concepts. We won't repeat it. You have to go back and get last week's presentation where we kind of quickly gave definitions for all of them. We covered all of them, and we could expand on all of them, but I think that for that session, it was sufficient. And so what we talked about last week, this concept in terms of distinctiveness. Dominion is living in opposition to these norms. Everything that this image is, we ought to be not. Everything that is embedded in this design, we should be committed to live in opposition to. And so dominion is creating evident distance and distinction between you and the world that you are seeking to impact. We talked about that last week. What we want to do today is to explore authenticity, and peculiarity. That is where we want to go to this afternoon. but before we get into that, I want to have a quick talk. It's now already 1:30 in this side of the world. I want us to have a quick talk and involve you in this conversation because I want us to have what I call considerations and a conversation. There are 6 areas of consideration that I want us to talk about. And I'm going to open up the lines for you to kind of throw back at me what you think. Let me hear what is going through your mind, what is streaming through your heart with each of these 6 points. And if we cover these 6 points quickly, then what we can do is get into this issue of authenticity and peculiarity. Now, there are some aspects of these 6 considerations, there are some aspects of these 6 considerations that are connected to the theme that we want to jump into, authenticity and peculiarity. So let's have a quick look at these 6 areas of consideration. I want you to join in and let me hear what you're saying. I have concerns, but they are not so much concerns as they are considerations, things that are in my mind. And I want to hear your views. Let me hear your input, what you think. And this is consideration number 1. What is the critical? How do we shift this conversation? How do we break the current talk shop model? Talk shop model is where I talk or somebody else speaks, and we just sit by and we make little contributions, and those contributions are always welcome, always appreciated. But at the end of the day, while we encourage collaboration and while there is involvement and people are sharing and throwing their 2 cents in, to me, I still think it is not hitting the right tomb. It is not hitting the right chord. Something has to switch on, because if this conversation is to continue for another year, and if it is to remain the way it is at the moment, then I will consider this to be an abject failure. How do we break the current talk shop model and begin to build greater consensus, greater collaboration, and be more deliberate in building a spiritual commonwealth? That's the first consideration. How do we shift this entire thing away from the talk shop model? The thing is that we've grown so accustomed to that. Not only have we grown accustomed to the talk shop model, we have grown accustomed to almost rallying around an individual. And how do we break that cultic disposition that's embedded inside of us? And when I say cultic disposition, it happens in all kinds of organizations. People, after a while, they want to rally around what Anderson Williams is saying. That if Anderson Williams is absent for about 3 sessions, the attendance go down, because I'm not too sure if he would be absent in the 4th session. And all of that is part of the talk shop model. The talk shop model revolves around the insight of an individual. The talk shop model revolves around the articulation of an individual. The talk shop model revolves around the charisma of an individual, and people just gravitate to that charisma and that wisdom, and they could live there. But the truth is, that is not the ideal. How do we break the talk shop model and begin to build greater consensus where you could contribute and you could contribute and another person could bring ideas and another person could throw their 2 cents in, not just talking about a particular topic, but begin to talk into ideas, begin to talk into considerations, begin to talk into initiatives, begin to talk into vision, begin to talk into real issues that could be constructed over a period of time. How do we break the talk shop model and begin to build greater consensus, begin to build real collaboration, and begin to invest in the design and in the execution of a real spiritual commonwealth? How can we do that? In talking about spiritual commonwealth, I am not just talking about, let's say, other groups, as it were, but I'm talking about other initiatives. Because when you think about commonwealth, we are not just talking about other groups that may have maybe dissimilar ideals and dissimilar objectives, but I'm talking about where we could begin to think about building education models, begin to build economic models, begin to build into social initiatives. How can we take a project and begin to throw our energies into it, whether we could identify whatever, maybe a project in Haiti, for example. I'm just calling a project. Can we pull together our resources, both finances, as well as spiritual insight, as well as administrative capabilities? How could we pull that together? How do we shift this current dialogue and this current conversation away from the talk shop model, where we can genuinely build consensus, collaboration, and spiritual commonwealth? That's one of my concerns. And so there's a couple of ideas I have, but I want to open that up to this talk here. What I wanted to do, in order for us to cover all of it, let me ask you to write your ideas down, write it down, whether you throw it on the chat, in the chat area, whether you just take note of it. And when we open up the lines, then you could kind of take us back to, well, I want to contribute to topic number 1 or topic number 2. Then let's do that quickly. Take note. Don't just listen, but take note of where you want to cast your comments so that we could go back to it, right? That's concern number 1, breaking the current talk shop. And again, if you're sitting here as a leader, these are things that you must consider. You're looking at the evolution of what's being constructed. You're looking at the trajectory of what is being designed. You could look at the extrapolation, how things are basically going and the direction which is going. And you want to basically begin to speak into its future state long before you get there. It is the principle we discover in Noah. Noah built a boat because rain was coming. The worst thing you could do as a leader is to start to build a boat when it begins to rain. You don't build a boat when it starts to rain. You build a boat in anticipation of a day of rain. And so if we continue to do what we are doing now, we would find ourselves behind the cloud in a year from now. This model, though ideal for the moment, is not ideal for the future. The second concern, how do we assume inner distinctiveness matched by outward ordinariness? Now that's part of the presentation today, if at all we get to it. How do we assume inner distinctiveness matched by outward ordinariness? What I would describe as hidden in plain sight, being a sleeper within the current arrangement of life. You know how sleepers are? A sleeper is like a person who's armed and dangerous and just waiting for his command. That command could be a coded comment. You know, if you look at those espionage movies, it could be a coded comment. And the moment the person gets a call and that coded comment is conveyed, he's activated. But all along, he's just hidden in plain sight. Now, as I said earlier, the kingdom does not focus on the optics. The optics are not the critical feature of the kingdom. The kingdom does not have an external attractiveness. And while we talk about the nations of the earth will go up to Zion and say, teach us your ways, the attractiveness of the kingdom is not in its external appeal. Because in looking at what Nebuchadnezzar saw versus a rock cut out from a mountain without human hands, if you look at both images and you have to identify one that you will gravitate towards, I promise you, the rock cut out by without human hands is not the one that you will gravitate to naturally. Because the kingdom requires discernment. You have to discern its beauty. You have to drill past the external to identify the internal grandeur. And so how do we assume inner distinctiveness? Our distinctiveness is not in how we dress. The danger is that religion forced us to assume distinctiveness on the outside. So we dress with these long clothing that's more consistent with people living in Pennsylvania somewhere, or these religious groupings living in Pennsylvania. Or we hug our Bibles under arms, or we dress weird and we speak weird and we say amen at the end of a sentence and hallelujah before the sentence. And we have all of this religious behavior that is easy to capture on the outside. It is the first thing you see. You could know who a Christian is by looking at his external behavior. And very often what you see is religion, not profundity. The question is, how do we assume inner distinctiveness matched by outward ordinariness? That you know how to be hidden in plain sight. You know how to be a sleeper within the structure. That the thing that makes you who you are is not the church you attend, it's what exists between your two ears. The thing that makes you unique, that makes you different, that makes you distinct. I mean, Daniel in Babylon, the system could easily identify him as the average wise man. The system could identify him as another one of the wise men in Babylon. He was right there. But though he was seen as one of the wise men in Babylon, he was distinct. He was different from them. As a matter of fact, he prayed that God will give him insight into the dream in order for that distinctiveness to be the standing out feature, How do we assume inner distinctiveness matched by outward ordinariness? And so that's an important question. And that takes me to identify one or 2 points. Live immersed, inundated, and saturated with the Spirit. We have to live immersed in, inundated with, and saturated with the Spirit. That is not a casual comment. I am convinced that a lot of what you see with the early church and with the early apostles in terms of the consistent stream of miraculous, these people lived in a world of saturation. And they were so committed to living in this state of being immersed in, inundated by, and saturated with the Spirit. They were so committed to that, that even when it came to allocating menial tasks, and I know that there's a lot of people who believe that the apostles were a little bit too highbrowed when they said, well, we will not give ourselves to serving tables. And we sometimes think that they were surrendering the menial responsibilities. But I want to interpret that as saying these guys were so committed to living in a zone of being immersed in, inundated by, and saturated with the Spirit. And this is a zone that we have to reassume. In the hostility and in the busyness of life, we have to find a place to give priority to this particular dimension. We have to find a zone, find a space, make room for this particular dimension. Let us not become so focused on intelligent Christianity with the nice verbs and the flashy little sentences and the beautiful presentations, but this is a massive priority. Live immersed in, inundated by, and saturated with the Spirit. This is an important point as well. The singularity of the Spirit of Christ is the chisel that shapes our distinctiveness. The singularity of the Spirit of Christ, that's the chisel that shapes our distinctiveness. So this is a very important feature of our concern. Here's the question: how do we assume inner distinctiveness matched by outward ordinariness? How do we take on that sleeper attitude? Third point: how do we break the current model? We have to be deliberate in breaking the current models of insularity and exclusivity. And we have to see the kingdom beyond our pigeonholes. That's an important point as well. We have to be deliberate in breaking the current models of insularity and exclusivity. Too many people build walls around their little initiatives. So If you have a church down the street, you build walls around your initiatives, and you utilize platforms such as these in order to build your walls higher and to continue your world of exclusivity. How do we break the models of insularity and exclusivity? Put it another way. How do we get rid of the siloed model of Christianity, where we build silos? How do we break that? How can we be more deliberate in breaking that? Little do we realize, some of that attitude could be right there with us. People, as I said, will build their little world separate and apart from everybody else, and they join meetings like these just to get more arsenal and more resource to go back and build their world of insularity. Your walls get higher, your walls get thicker, and so you go into your little enclave and you become a master of your world. And so coming to sessions like these are only designed to gather resources to go back to your enclave, gather resources to run back to your enclave, but your enclave will never ever become a part of the world that we are seeking to build. Or we can become so focused and fixated on what we are doing that we can easily ignore what others are doing. How do we become more deliberate in breaking the current models of insularity and exclusivity, where we only see the kingdom from within our little pigeonholes? In saying that, there are many people who we know who are not a part of this conversation. We need to celebrate them, pray for them, make mention of them. Some of them are my dear friends. I mean, some of you are on this platform, and some of you are a part of Abraham John's initiative. Very excellent man. And so we need to celebrate Abraham, applaud his effort, encourage him when necessary. I shoot him a note every now and again just to commend him for what he's doing. The same I could say for other people, but we have to be very deliberate. Do not live in a world where you are deluded into believing that what you are doing is all that should be done, and anybody else who's doing otherwise, they are in a world of error. We don't live there. We have to be deliberate in breaking the models of insularity and exclusivity, and let us see the kingdom beyond our own personal pigeonholes. That's an important concern. Remember, I want you to join in the conversation, write your comments down, and when we open up the lines, we're going to get into it. Next is the need for us to, this is the point, we have to continue to re-examine the issues of dominion. This is a really important point to me. Something we're going to talk about next week. Maybe I should kind of almost tell you hint what it is. It's interesting that in the image that Daniel saw, the kingdom was a rock cut out without human hands. And the thing is this, that every single part of the image that Nebuchadnezzar saw, head of gold, chest and arm of silver, all of those precious metals can be found in a rock, all of them. Sometimes we assume that the world is so completely contrary to the kingdom, but little do we realize that very often some components of the world are actually found in the kingdom. And so that's a long talk. But then the part that really captured my attention this week as I was thinking and musing over it is the interesting part that the last part of it, the clay together with the iron, the clay together with the iron. The clay is almost like the weakest part of the rock component, the weakest part of the rock component. And I began entertaining the thought, and let me tell you where my mind is going, and we're going to get into this next week. We have assumed in an eschatological way that those 10 toes at one point, they were the European Union. We have assumed and we've given it all kind of titles, but hear this. Can the 10 toes, and we're going to talk more about this, I'm just asking a question today, we're going to jump into this. Can the 10 toes be a diluted component of the kingdom and a somewhat diluted one, but equally a mixture incorporating certain aspects of Christian values and Christian behavior and Christian expressions mixed together with all of the different elements of Babylonian systems, creating a false concept of dominion and casting it right in front of our gaze. Now, hold that in your mind, because we're going to talk about it next week and then build on it. But there's a reason why we have to re-examine the issues of dominion, because it's been polluted in all kinds of different ways. Listen to me. Most of us see it, when you talk about dominion, most of us see dominion as a domineering or a dogmatically enforced version of the kingdom over a people, where we enforce it in a dogmatic, take it or die, take it or go to hell, Most of us see dominion as domineering or dogmatically enforcing our version of the kingdom over a people. It's what I call a form of Christian Taliban, where take it or die. And so we've built a model of Christianity and a model of dominion that looks very much like what I call the Christian Taliban. This version can so easily result in a model of the kingdom. Hear me, this is so important. This wrong concept of dominion can result in us having a model of the kingdom or a model of church that looks no different from present-day Afghanistan. The reason why I use the connection of Taliban and present-day Afghanistan is to underscore one critical point. Our version of dominion is take over, control, dominate, dogmatically enforce. That's our concept of dominion. Take over politics and take over the 7 mountains and take it over with a somewhat Christian Taliban mentality. And if that version or that model of dominion continues to express itself, we can find ourselves with a model of the kingdom or a model of Christianity that looks no different than present-day Afghanistan. What does it look like? Listen, the Taliban put so much energy in enforcing its agenda, exacting punishment on anyone who would not yield to its dictate, that now it does not know how to govern. So the Taliban always wanted control of Afghanistan. Man, they would have wars, they would have all kinds of skirmishes. They'll do anything necessary because, let's take over. Now that they have it, they don't know how to govern, because their perspective of enforcing and dogmatically insisting and domineering, that has so been a concept of its behavior. It's been their modus operandi that now that they have control, they don't know how to govern. And so the same principle we have to understand. If we do not understand dominion the way God has ordained it, we will be no different than building a present-day Christian version of Afghanistan, where we want to take over and take over. So we want to take over education. You want to take over economics. And when you get there and you've now taken it over, you don't know how to govern it. You don't know how to manage it. You don't know how to exercise a certain level of benevolent control or mastery over the thing, because your perspective of dominion has been so one-sided and you never saw government as a critical part of your dominion theory. That's the fourth issue of my concern. Take note, please write the stuff down. We're going to circle back to it. The fifth issue is this: authenticity must become even more gravitational in our world. That word authenticity, it must become even more gravitational. That's a profoundly important word, because there is no dominion without authenticity. Authenticity must become even more gravitational in our world. What do we mean by authenticity? Authenticity comes from the word authentic, which originally came from the word authoritative or authorized. Interestingly, we sometimes never saw the connection. Authenticity literally originally came from the word authoritative or authorized. You realize if you look at the word, you could see the structure of the word is almost starting the same. Authenticity comes originally from the word authoritative and authorized. Put it another way, if you lack authenticity, then you lack authorization. If you lack authenticity, you lack authorization. Those two things are indelibly connected. Authenticity is linked to the word authoritative and authorization. Now, let me kind of drill a little bit further. The Greek word authentikos basically means original, genuine, and undiluted. Original, genuine, and undiluted. Authenticity describes an individual who is almost complete pedigreed. Pedigreed. In Trinidad, we have a bunch of mongrel dogs. I'm going to use the correct language, mongrel dogs. We call them puthounds. They run around as stray dogs all over the country. And after a while, the breed of the dog, they've been mixed so many times that you don't even know what they are anymore. It's like a mixture of all kinds of dogs. That could be a Doberman mixed with a mixed with a poodle, maybe mixed with an Alsatian. The thing is so mixed up that after a while, you don't even know what the real breed of the dog is. So it's a mongrel dog. And so these dogs are running around stray all over the country. Now, when you talk about authenticity, authentikos describes a state where you maintain pedigree. Pedigree means you have no blending. Nothing is blended into you. You're not diluted. They don't add some of this and you become something else. So here you are, a proper functioning born-again kingdom citizen, but you add a little bit of religion. You add a little bit of worldliness. You throw a little ounce of church inside of there. You throw people's distorted version of Christianity. And after a while, you become a deluded self. You have become diluted. You are not your real self anymore. Authentikos means to be original, undiluted, and genuine. Think about man in the beginning. Long before there was church, long before he had a pastor, long before he went and sang songs in a building, man, without being compromised in any way, in his original state, could be defined as authentikos. It was just man and God in his original, undiluted, uncompromised, genuine state. Now, what passes for authenticity is really inauthenticity. We become so authentic at being inauthentic that we call inauthentic authentic. And so we have this blend, this mixture of humanity, this mixture of a believer, mixture of church that lacks its genuineness. Authentikos means original, genuine, and undiluted. Now I'm dealing with mature people here, and I'm sure you could find all the many nuances inside of it. Now let me kind of take this word out of the Greek, and let's see this word from the etymological side. Now the etymology, the very etymology, meaning the root, the times when the word was first used, the etymology of the word authentic comes from two words. Authentic comes from two words. One is the word auto, which means self. Auto hentis. So we say authentic, but it was auto hentis. Auto hentis. The word auto means self, and hentis means being. Put together, the word means be yourself. Be yourself. Be yourself. What is authenticity? Be yourself. And so that takes me to this critical statement. Most of us have settled for another person's definition of acceptability. Thus, we become a caricatured version of ourselves. We are everything but our authentic self. This is something I threw up on Twitter. For some of you who don't know, I am actually on Twitter, but every now and again I jump on Twitter and just leave a provocative statement and don't go on for months. I have not thrown a tweet up for, I think, nearing a year now, but I just throw a tweet up every now and again and I disappear. And so I'm going to be jumping back on Twitter and leaving a couple more comments. But this is a tweet I posted sometime last year that I went back up and I pulled it out just to throw on this particular comment, dealing with the whole issue of authenticity and that whole issue of autohentis, being yourself, being yourself, being yourself, and not being another person's version of who you should be. This is a tweet that I posted sometime last year. Color me outlier, but I stopped living up to other people's idealized version of who I am. People's opinions, their condemnation, their commendation, disapproval or approval have all been relegated to ambient noise simply because I choose not to outsource my purpose and be owned by another man's narrative. That's a very, every now and again you go back to comments like these and I am amazed at the content. So I wrote this however long ago, but I went back to it after discovering what authenticity really is all about. Let me say it again, color me outlier, but I stopped living up to other people's idealized version of who I am. Well, Anderson, you're a man of God, you had to dress this way. Well, Anderson, you're a man of God, you had to talk this way. Well, Anderson, you're a man of God, you have to behave this way. Anderson, you're a man of God, this is how you ought to behave. Anderson, you are a Trinidadian, this is what you should be. Anderson, you're a member of this organization, this is who you should be. Nonsense. I stopped living up to other people's idealized version of who I am. People's opinions, their condemnation, their commendation, their disapproval, and their approval have all been relegated to ambient noise. Why? I choose not to outsource my purpose and be owned by another man's narrative. That's my quote. Point I make is this, that listen, what authenticity originally meant? Autohentis, be yourself. Most of us in this call, we are all living up to somebody's definition. You go to church and this is how you must be. You're a member of the Pentecostal religion, this is how you must be. You're an American, this is how you behave. You're a white American, this is how you behave. You're a Trump loyalist American, this is how you behave. You're a demo, and all of us are living this caricatured version of who we should be, not knowing, listen, there is an original, genuine, undiluted definition that exists and has your name tag on it. And you need to live by that particular version. That's the fifth principle. The sixth one is a bit long, so I'm going to stop there and open up the lines. And maybe this is as far as we go, and we're going to leave the rest of this conversation to a discussion. So I'm going to pull out of this conversation here. I'm going to go back and close this call, stop sharing. I may jump back in and share eventually, but I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to ask Kelvin. Kelvin, you want to take this call for a little bit? And take the call and let's get some dialogue and back and forth. Okay, Kelvin, the ball in your court. Or you could, you normally kind of jump in first with your comments. So
yeah,
you're free to do that. But before I do that, Kelvin, let me kind of, let me make a comment here. I saw, hold on, let me see. I'm kind of running through here. David, I missed you, man. As a matter of fact, David Castro, I missed you. I was about only today to say, let me give Ivan a call and get your number and call you because I miss your comments. I miss your contribution. I miss having you on this call. And I was hoping, only this morning I got up thinking about you and I was saying, I hope that you're well. I hope you're okay. But I just want to announce before we open up the lines, man, I miss you. I miss you. I miss you. And I feel so good to have you back on the call today. So
thank you.
So David, good to have you, man.
Thank you. I was traveling. I was in Trinidad for 12 days.
You were in Trinidad? Good heavens. Did you have roti and doubles?
I sure did, man. I had doubles every morning and roti every day.
Good heavens. Did you connect with Kelvin Mohammed in Trinidad?
No, not on this trip.
Oh, man. Listen, you're not allowed to go to Trinidad if you don't connect with the guys down there. But good. Glad that you were in Trinidad. Glad that you had some good hospitality. Hope that the people down there treated you well. When next you're there, holler at me, man. Let's connect.
I will. It's great to be back. I've got a couple comments a little later to make on something.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, Kelvin Chambliss, I shoot the ball in your court, bro. So you could take it from there.
Yeah, on many fronts, it's like a woe is me, I'm undone. You know, when you see a standard of something that you want to ascribe to and you believe you ought to ascribe to, it has you look deep within. And so many of the points, I wish you would have kept up one of those points. I forget what it was. There's just so many of them. But needless to say, this issue of authenticity always keeps coming up. I think that what happens many times is that we're afraid to be authentic because who we truly are scares us or makes us feel deficient or whatever it is that could have some elements of shame, whatever it is. Everybody just does not embrace their authentic self. So this was really, really, really challenging, Anderson. I think that one thing that will help us will be the issue of harping in that this should not be a religious call. That, you know, if the more we keep it in a religious framework, the more we will continue to ascribe to.
I lost you there, Kelvin. You still there? I think we lost Kelvin there.
Okay.
Yeah, I lost you. The last thing we heard you say, Kelvin, is the more you subscribe.
Yeah, the more we subscribe to the religious framework is the more we play into it and the more we keep being inauthentic. So, you know, in order to be authentic, I think many of the sacred cows have to be kicked over. Right. Many of the things that we ascribe to, many of the things that make us uncomfortable or make people uncomfortable. I don't like that side of you. I don't like when you, I don't like that music. I don't like all of those kind of things that brings up the Pharisee inside of us and keeps us from accepting and embracing difference. It's a beautiful thing. You may not like what I like. I may not like what you like all the time, but I embrace you. I accept you, you know, and that's more important than our differences. So there's a lot of work to be done in that and a lot of things to be seen. I see some hands up. I'm very interested in hearing from.
Let me respond to a couple of things. That
yeah, please do. Please do.
Let me respond. Listen, a couple of years ago, I tell people very often, the most transformative moment in my life came about at a time when it was my most broken moment. I was broken, I was crushed, I was literally at my worst state, and my worst moment was my most liberating moment. And, you know, I literally could see the reality of that scripture: when I'm weak, then he is strong. Some of you know some of my story, most of you don't. But a part of my life that was designed to crush me is what liberated me. And more than that, I saw Christianity in its most vitriolic form. I saw friends and believers that I would have walked with and built with, and they worked overtime. They literally worked overtime to destroy me. And my response to all of that is that their efforts, if God really called me, then they will find themselves kicking against the goads. I saw so many things. I saw what wrong building looks like, because I was a part of an organization that was supposedly global. But I suddenly realized that you could build a big insular structure that extends over the world, but insular nonetheless. It's not global, it's insular, but you reach far. I saw so many distortions, and that was part of my liberation. But let me tell you, one of the most liberating concepts that brought me into life was a friend of mine. His name is Errol Lewis. Maybe you must have heard me talk about Errol Lewis before. But Errol introduced me to a simple word, simple statement: I really don't care. You have no idea how liberating that was for me. I really don't care. That people's opinion, it no longer mattered to me. I began tentatively. I mean, we started something in Trinidad called BLS years ago, and I used to be almost like tiptoeing into my ideas, not wanting to offend nobody, being careful to kind of sugarcoat certain comments. And the more I leaned into the fact that this is what my calling is the more I really don't care anymore. I really don't care. I don't care. And so I am always giving Errol credit for introducing me to that simple concept: I really don't care. Let me tell you something else. The other thing that was quite liberating, I'm going to point you now. Listen, I like what Kelvin said. Let's stop holding this conversation as some little religious concept. Another book liberated me. A guy by the name of Mark Manson wrote a book. I won't tell you the title of the book, but that book by Mark Manson, I read that book, and that gave me perspective that reinforced my whole position of I don't care. I really don't care. That I had to live out of my authentic self, or to my sense of who I am, who God called me to be. And the more I leaned into that, is the more I realized, listen, this is what I was born to do. This is what I am called to do. It liberated me in all kinds of ways. So listen, I can be quite offensive to a lot of people. I don't choose to offend. I don't deliberately set out to offend. You get to know me. I am driven by love. I'm driven by concern. I am driven by a deep sense of otherness. But at the core of my operation is that, listen, if in trying to bring you into life, I offend you, I don't owe you an apology. I hold to Shakespeare's perspective. Sometimes you have to be cruel to be kind. And so I stopped being some caricatured version of who I should be in order to be accepted by anybody. Very often, that desire for acceptance by everybody and to be welcomed by everybody can best be described as the fear of man. We have more fear of man and so little fear of God. But let me direct you, those of you who are sufficiently mature and non-religious, try to get a hold of Mark Manson's book. I won't tell you what's the title of it. Go and find it yourself. All right. So yes, Kelvin. Let me ask Kelvin Mohammed to jump in there now. Yeah, Kelvin Mohammed, the hand is up. Shoot.
Yes, sir. Thank you again, Andy, for this very, very inspiring word. Very powerful. I love the word authenticity, as you know. You know, in Mark 5, Jesus goes to the place of the gatherings. He meets a man who is demon possessed. And the man says his name is Legion. The name Legion is not a human name. It denotes many identities. Now, it's again a picture of someone who has imbibed and received a Babylonian identity, a Medo-Persian identity, a Roman identity, the identity of this world. It's a picture. And what's interesting is that this same picture is seen in the book of Revelation, chapter 13, the beast coming out of the sea. Again, I'm still talking about authenticity. And that beast has the body of a lion, the body of a bear, and a leopard. Again, it's the same Daniel 2 image in a different metaphor. He has 7 heads and 10 horns. What's interesting is that what conquers this beast of confusion, what conquers this inauthentic image, is the lamb. The lamb conquers the beast. So that really, I believe the answer to inauthenticity is the nature of the lamb. And that this beast we see in Revelation 13 is a picture of the mixed up identity, the falsehood, the, as we say in Trinidad, the callaloo kind of mindset that exists where people do not know who they are. And that is it. Their name is Legion. That's what it is. If you ask people who they are, their name is Legion. Now, what's the thing about it? I believe, and let me throw this in, I believe the new picture of success, my friends, is an authentic voice. I think as you talked about your own experience, Andy, I believe the new success story in the earth will be people with an authentic voice. We live in a world where young people are already getting into the metaverse and they are creating realities outside of this verse that we live in. So that we're living in a world where people are immersing themselves in strange and false identities. But we've done so as a church for a long time, because in the church, we have defined success by numbers. And I have a saying, don't tell me your numbers, tell me your narratives. Don't tell me your statistics, tell me your stories. What stories do you have to talk about where God has taken you from and where you are today? And the truth is, we have a very plastic, made up kind of church culture. It is consumer oriented, it is need based, it's superficial. And I really believe the next big thing on the market, for want of a better word, is authentic people. The world is going to clamor for authenticity, you know, especially as we see the frustration of this false reality around us. But excellent teaching, Andy. Just my 2 bits.
Before part of it, the whole thing, is something I was saying in a meeting on Sunday. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yeah, something I was saying in a meeting on Sunday is that, what we have done is as though we shrink wrapped the never-ending frontier of the kingdom into a size that is convenient to our biases. Let me say that again. We shrink wrap the never-ending frontiers of the kingdom into a size that is convenient to our biases. And in doing that, we have allowed our shrink-wrapped version of this never-ending frontier of the kingdom to define who we are. So, and then we say, you know what, I'm defined by the kingdom. No, you are defined by your biased version of the kingdom. So you are still you're still cheapening yourself. You are defined by your biased version of the kingdom. So you're still cheapening yourself. And I think it really is, it boils down to us seeing God correctly, because sight of God will always ricochet to sight of self. And that dynamic, I think, is really important. And so I want to kind of say again what you're saying, Kelvin. You're totally right and on point that the next move, because one of the reasons why you have this large exodus within the church, the number one reason, I've said this on this platform many times, the number one reason for the massive exodus out of the church across the earth is inauthenticity. People have said it is fake, it is too fake, it is too staged, it is too choreographed. A lot of what passes for church is too staged, too faked, and too choreographed. And so our young people are running away from this stuff in droves. And if we do not find the authenticity that God has ordained us to find or to live out of, we will continue to lose our young people and lose our world. So that's a very good point. So excellent. Before I go forward, I was just scrolling through all of the attendees on this meeting today, and I actually see Errol Lewis on this call. Errol, I just called your name. I don't know if you were there when I called your name. Before I open up the lines to the other people, can I ask you, Errol, to just unlock, just kind of unmute your line and just kind of let your voice be heard? Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Errol Lewis that I just spoke of, if he can unmute his mic. Errol, you there? Errol.
I am
Errol,
here. Good
yes,
evening.
Errol. Listen, this is the man that I credit for those words. I really don't care. Errol, let me ask you to say something to the group, because listen, I made mention of you not knowing that you were there. So, so say hi.
Well, I was hoping to stay very quietly on the side, even though Pastor Kelvin Mohammed, I was tempted to ask you for a contact so I can speak with you afterwards. But I didn't want to make myself known in this environment yet. But Andy, I align with everything you're saying, and me saying that I don't care, and which is a position I have taken for a long time now, because I've found myself under attack by even the people that you thought would love you within the established church. And I had to take a position where, in order to achieve what I wanted to achieve, I had to be singular, I had to be focused on God, and I had to not care about some of the things or the darts and the arrows that were being thrown at me. So I adopted that position, and I'm willing to share it with you because I did not copyright it, so I can't make the billion on it this year.
Okay, Errol, thank you, sir. Listen, this is, ladies, all of you on this call, this is one of the most remarkable human. As a matter of fact, if you don't know my story, I credit a lot of what I'm doing today to this man, Errol Lewis. 6 or 7 years ago, I was about to head off to Guyana and build furniture. I was so disappointed with everything that Christianity was. I was completely frustrated with what Christianity was. And more than that, I had a whole bunch of stuff was happening around me. And Errol Lewis was one of the guys who saw a call of God on me that I should not have cast aside out of my own frustration. And so, Errol, I've said it to you a million times, and I say on this platform, man, thank you very much for at least turning my eyes away from my stupidity. Thank you. All right. I see, is it Muriel? I'm going to ask Dr. White. I'm going to give you the mic first, and then we're going to turn to Castro soon thereafter. Dr. White, you're up.
Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the wisdom that's being shared on this platform today. And one of the questions I want to go back to, I have about 3 things I would like to state. The question was asked that how can the group have a shift from present day style or presentation style to incorporate everyone to feel inclusive or have a voice. And when that question was asked, the first thing that came to my mind is that would take time, because I go back to the learning and the teaching that everyone learns in different ways. Like, you know, that model that one can learn through seeing, one could learn through hearing and articulation, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this is one of those platforms where all those area and different style of learning will come in, where many of us will feel that we can be included and our voice will matter or takes weight as to the heavy hitters on the line, because they've earned it. You know, give honor to whose honor is due. And then also for us to thank you for sharing that statement about Mr. Errol Lewis, who said that I myself have gone through experience of, 52 years of being born into church and live in church. I've experienced everything that you could possibly happen in an organized church, the love, the hate, etc. And you come out with understanding, if you really love the Lord, that if you are saved, that was one of the most rewarding things that I learned from one experience when I had a very bad experience as well. The question that was asked of, well, was this person saved? Because if this person is saved, they would not have conduct themselves towards me in that manner. So that was actually one of my saving grace questions, just as the statement that Mr. Errol have taught Andy and I have learned again today. And but one thing I do have a concern about, I know, and I respect those who make that statement, that this is, we need to move away. And I think what I'm hearing is not the spiritual aspect of learning, but the religious aspect of approach, and what we learn to sit down, learn to stand up, learn to say amen and everything. But I am being very cautious about that, because I believe that now in this realm, I'm called to serve as a pastor. It's not one of my only, titles that I've held, but I can be effective in this structure that God has placed me. And many of us are different parts of the world, and it might be a religious organization that we might be in, or a community organization. I don't know the broad spectrum, but I believe this teaching is being allowed for us to have deeper knowledge and wisdom and understanding, so we can be our authentic self where God has called us to be, and that we can develop what the Lord is allowing to be put into the atmosphere for his greater good. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Well said. Well said. David, you're up, man.
Thank you. There's a basic fundamental understanding that we have to be able to have commonwealth, to be able to be of one purpose, one mind, one love, one spirit. And that fundamental key word is dominion. And understanding that God is all about dominion. God is a government, and the government expresses through dominion. And so understanding that and what that means from God's perspective is very fundamental for us to be able to answer and come to a measure of agreement to be that commonwealth, to be able to come together from different parts of the world and have an impact in this world with the kingdom. One of the things that when we are saved, scripture tells us that we've been transferred from one dominion, one kingdom, to another dominion. The problem is that after we were born again and we had the joy of redemption, then the church stepped in and didn't teach us about the dominion that we were transferred to. But it sure discipled us and gave us all the teachings about the church and the theology and the doctrine and the dogma of the church and the government of the church, whatever that was. So we got indoctrinated in a total different government and dominion, which wasn't the intent that God had when he redeemed you and I. So we
Amen.
have to have a clear understanding of what is the government and the dominion of God. What is Christ in my life? I hear a lot of people talk about, I want to be Christ-like, Christ. Well, what does Christ really mean? Does it mean that he's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, which that interprets into government and dominion? Or is he just the person that you want to emulate and you want to just feel good about and you talk about in terms of lifestyle or this? It's a big difference. So
Right.
I think that one of the things to be able to begin to do that transition, Fred Tobin, he has that book of understanding, what is the keys to the kingdom, the themes of the kingdom, so that you can have a different mindset, so you can have a kingdom mindset. And he gives you those 5 themes, of government, of law, of culture, of citizenship. Well, all that has to do with government. And I believe that this is what we need a lot of. And I agree with my sister that just said, we need the teaching. That's the first step, because many have been taught the wrong way. We have entered into ministry propagating what we learned, what was passed down to us. And so we didn't learn kingdom. We learned eschatology, we learned theology, we learned dispensationalism, we learned all kinds of stuff. Had nothing to do with kingdom or dominion. Authenticity is the fruit of dominion, of the government of God, and the kingship and the lordship of Christ in somebody's life.
Beautiful, beautiful. That's absolutely well said. Let me rehearse the point that I made about dominion, just to kind of remind you of it, because I see the need, just as was said there, for us to explore this and to understand it in a real sense. And I said, I'm just going to read this slide because I'm having problems kind of opening it back up to share my screen with you. But there's the need to re-examine the issues of dominion. Most of us see dominion as domineering or dogmatically enforcing our version of the kingdom over a people, what I call a form of Christian Taliban. This version can so easily result in a model of the kingdom or a model of church or a model of Christianity that looks like present-day Afghanistan. What does the present-day Afghanistan looks like? The Taliban put so much energy into enforcing its agenda, exacting punishment on everyone who will not yield to its dictate. It was so incessant on taking over and taking over that now it has taken over, it does not know how to govern. And so Afghanistan is total chaos, simply because those who now are called to govern, they've been so fixated in exacting punishment and ruling and taking control and smashing up and breaking down. And at the end of the day, what you have is chaos on the ground. And I was just thinking about that Afghanistan model and just wondering it to myself, to what extent our definition of taking over the kingdom and taking over the 7 mountains can look like a present-day Afghanistan if we are to take over education with our present mindset and take over banking with our present mindset. So it's just a thought, but I totally agree that this is a very, very critical area that we need to concern ourselves with. And I think David put his finger on a very significant pulse right there. So excellent. Who's next? Lillian, your hand is up. Let me ask you to unmute and bring a contribution.
Thank you. So listening to all of this, what you just repeated from your presentation, Andy, when you were talking about that particular, when you were on that particular point before, the word that just jumped out to me as sort of a student and a practitioner in political science is legitimacy. Because when it comes to any kind of system of government, it rests upon the idea of legitimacy, where a people or a group are willing to submit to that social and political order and economic order. And so the whole approach of you must do this and you must, sort of believe this and you must abide by this, and trying to dominate the world with this Bible thumping approach to quote unquote Christian governance. It gets a lot of pushback from within the church when, you always talk about that mass exodus of especially young people, but just anyone that does not see, the way the church itself is run as legitimate because of its inauthenticity and its ineffectuality in changing the lives of people. But then even outside, you look at, the whole debate about abortion rights and all these things. And the major, talking point is just because you believe that your God says this doesn't mean I have to abide by that. Why are you trying to impose your, religious belief onto me? That is a matter of the church conducting itself in such a way as to delegitimize itself as an authority on how society should be run, because it's so busy trying to enforce this, its statutes that it itself does not abide by, rather than trying to prove itself effectual and transformative. Because once you do that, then the people will come. That is how, and of course, we talked last week about how the church, we're not supposed to be looking at the first century church model as the way forward. We're supposed to be looking at Revelation, and I think that was a really important point that I had to take on board, right? But even in that first church scenario, they were just doing them, as we say, in the current vernacular. They were just fellowshipping amongst themselves, and the Spirit was moving in so many ways, supernaturally, that people were coming like moths to the flame because they saw transformation. And that is how you get legitimacy, by proving yourself effectual in transforming the lives of people. So that's an important. But then I was hearing Kevin Mohammed talking about sort of the lamb and how sort of that is it's the lamb that overcomes the dragon and all of that and the beast. But then the question is, what is the lamb, and how does the lamb function, and how does the lamb think? Because there's a whole misconception within Christian culture writ large about what it means to be even harmless as a dove, and what it means to be a lamb. Because we're supposed to emulate the lamb, right? But then there's this idea that there's a false humility, and there's oh, woe is me, and I'm supposed to be broke and poor and powerless. But that's not the lamb. The lamb is brave because it submits itself to death for the sake of another. The lamb is humble because it is willing to submit itself to leadership. So there's so many misconceptions about the character of the lamb and its psychology that misdirect very, even well-meaning Christians into this, caring too much about what people think in order not to offend too much because, the lamb is not offensive because it's woolly and fuzzy. So that's my 2 cents, my few cents there. Thank you.
You said so much inside of there, but there is a conversation that we need to have at some point in terms of governing in a pluralistic society. How do you govern in a world like that? What does kingdom government looks like in a world of opposing perspective? How did Daniel advise Nebuchadnezzar on agendas that were almost contrary to some of his own personal conviction? Because you have to understand that Daniel was in fact an advisor to Nebuchadnezzar. How do you give advice to an empire whose very existence stands in opposition to everything that you are? What does advice look like? What is kingdom advice in that regard when the overall perspective? I mean, I use America as an example today. America is completely polarized, and I am saddened by it because even families are being splintered because of varying political perspectives and persuasions. I had a conversation with a mother not too long ago, and this mother is describing her own son that she no longer speaks to because the son leans to a political persuasion that is not consistent with the mother's own. And so across America, you have this massive divide taking place on all kinds of levels. And the Christians really believe that they are doing God a service by standing in the corner of a political party that postures itself as being the party that celebrates Christianity. But at the same time, I want to use the term that you use, is that they find themselves almost creating a kind of a warped perspective of what the faith is. And there is the need for people to begin to really see the kingdom beyond the pigeonhole of their own biases and really see what the kingdom looks like. And I think that there is the need for us to have conversations like that. I'm really considering at some point to have a webinar on some topics like those, just to have a specific webinar, maybe for 1 day or 2 days, where we can get into some of those real issues that I don't think I need to talk about on platforms like this one, but have a very, very, very topic-specific kind of webinar from time to time to address some of those issues. And I like how Lillian describes some of those issues because they are real. They are very, very real. I like the issue of legitimacy as well. That's a critical part. Legitimacy versus illegitimacy. Good conversations, good topic, good place for us to kind of yeah, Lillian, you have something else there. Shoot.
You know, I always look forward to your book recommendations, and so this one that you gave today was really funny. But
I didn't call the name, right?
It's on the chat. It's on the chat. But there's a Netflix documentary called The Family, and there's a book that it's derived from a book by the same name by a guy named Jeff Charlotte, and I'll drop it in the chat. And he basically charts the evolution of this whole American style idea of Christian dominion and all of the very warped, like you said, warped theologies behind it and where it all evolved from. So I will drop it in the chat if anybody's interested. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, Joel, you're up. Joel, your hand is up. By now you could be getting all kind of muscle ache.
Ever so slightly. Well, I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, I'm good, man. I don't complain. I stop complaining. Nobody listens.
Well, there's no point. Yes. Well, to comply with point number one, I'm going to be addressing point number two, which is regarding assuming inner distinctiveness matched by outward ordinariness, hidden in plain sight. I thought of this and it made me think about when Paul says about being all things to all people. And you mentioned that you have to be immersed, inundated, and saturated with the Spirit, and to function in this sort of manner. And I think anything outside of that is really a tingling brass, like alluded to earlier, where you say, where someone said, oh, there's this sense of outward holiness and piety, which I find very distasteful. And it's something that actually made me not go to church for a very long time. But I came to the conviction that if Jesus endured these same religious people spitting in his face, then I can't think that I'm too much to put up with their nonsense as well. And what I want to ask you about really is, perhaps they're not paradoxes and it's just a lack of my understanding, but I'm thinking a major aspect or a major part of why things are so warped in the church is the reconciling of what appears to be outward paradoxes, where to be a friend with the world is to be an enemy with God. And also, you know, they say to be in the world but not of it. So you almost exist like a zombie, not caring about events in the world, or just being very callous and a lack of empathy and everything for people not in your particular little chapel, your particular little dogma, as it were. But then again, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. So how could you have such a fair and apprehensiveness towards the world? How do you function in the world? I don't know how to articulate this.
I understand that. I think, Joel, and to all of us in this call here, we have developed a monastic brand of Christianity.
Right.
And I think that monastic brand of Christianity has been foisted upon us from Constantine. You look at the faith pre-Constantine, and it was not so fixated on hiding away in buildings and disappearing into monastery and all this kind of stuff. You know, you had a church that referred to itself as the way, and it was right in the midst of the society. Look at a guy like Mark, who went down to India. All of these apostles went down into societies that at the time were considered pagan societies, and they brought life into those environments. What we have today is a church that is disappearing and no longer in the world. And I think the paradoxes are correct, that we have divorced ourselves from the world and we want the world to come to church to get saved. And it's no longer a matter of us taking the church to the world. And if at all we do, we try to run away from it as fast as possible. And we live inside of this orbit of delusion. So we believe that we are really special, and our distinctiveness is born out of us losing ourselves in that orbit of delusion. So we get up on a morning in our Christian beds, in our Christian homes, and where we turn our television onto Christian TV. And if at all we have to turn the radio on, we turn our radio onto Christian radio. And we hug our Christian spouses and we kiss them with our Christian kisses. And then we meet our Christian children, and then we have our Christian breakfast and we say our Christian prayer over our Christian breakfast. We take our Christian children to Christian school while we go to work, and we interact with our Christian friends. And on a break, we read our Christian Bible, and then we jump in our cars at the end of the day, put back on our Christian radio, go and pick up our Christian children from our Christian school, and we go back home in our Christian homes with our Christian families and go back to bed to create the same rut tomorrow morning. And little do you realize, the more you live in that rut is the further you are from the world, or the world is divorced from your entire existence. And let me say it again. The world is divorced from your existence. And so, put it another way. The longer you are a Christian, the less unsafe friends you have to influence. The less unsafe friends. So in your mind, the theory of pulling yourself away from them is the very same theory that cancels out your ability to win them. And what we do now is that we try to do a kind of a network marketing kind of arrangement to get to these unsafe people. And so we befriend them to buy our product called Christianity. But in reality, we don't befriend them. There's no friendship. Ask yourself, how many of you have unsafe friends that you could influence? And to what extent can we win these unsafe people if you continue to divorce yourself from them and you no longer befriend them. And so the very model that we have betrays the commission that we've been given. Let me say that again. The model of Christianity that we have, it betrays the commission that we've been given. We have a Christian philosophy that cancels out our Christian commission. It cannot work. The two of them will never work. We run so far from the world that we are called to influence that we are incapable of influencing it. Listen, let me give you how Jesus put it. Jesus said it this way. He gave this parable, and he used this parable. Here he says, this farmer goes out and he scatters seed into his field. And you know the whole parable and all the seed being scattered in the field, etc. And then his disciples asked him to explain this parable to them. And Jesus said, this is the meaning of the parable. The seeds are the sons of the kingdom. The seeds are the sons of the kingdom. The field is the world. And at the core of the parable is this, that God did not take the sons of the kingdom and hide them in a building. The parable is he took the sons of the kingdom and scattered them into the world. What we have done, we have basically reversed that entire parable, and instead of being scattered into the world, we are hiding away in buildings. And what we do further is that we inundate our people with church to protect them from the world. That's what most people call church, you know. Church is basically like some kind of protection from the world. So you go to church on a Monday, a Tuesday, a Wednesday, a Thursday, a Friday, a Saturday, and a Sunday. You inundate your people with church so that they are protected from the world. And at the end of the day, those people basically run to the world the moment they hit the age of 19. Our philosophy betrays our commission. We have to revise that. And so it is a conversation we need to have one of these days where we have to kind of redesign or look again at our evangelistic or kingdom mandate. We have to re-examine our kingdom mandate and how do we engage that and kind of cancel out this monastic model of the faith that betrays the commission and the assignment allocated to us. And so it's a good conversation we're going to have one of these days. I see Muriel is back up. So Muriel, your hand is up. You could unmute your mic.
Yes. I just want to say that it's so true about how we encircle ourselves with the same people that we can have no effect on. Even quickly in my church, when I became lead pastor, one of the things that I just wanted to not have, it was an anniversary service, because in my observation, just only the saved became blessed, anointed. And the people who even give their heart to the Lord, you couldn't even see them a Sunday after. And I felt that it was an ineffective way to spend my Sunday afternoon. This big program that we spend months preparing for, and it had no kingdom growth. And but one of the things that worked for me, before I became a pastor, I worked in a paramilitary organization where everybody carry weapons and we have high power training and everything. And so everyone had great big egos, everybody, when we walk in, doors open, and everybody respect you because you're wearing uniforms and stuff. But I was a believer in that organization, and it took me years, decades to disciple some of the people who are now amazing women and men of God. Some of them were, today they're a white witch, tomorrow they're a black witch, tomorrow they're heterosexual, tomorrow they same-sex relationship. It was on and on and on with the immorality within the circles that we were in. But I stayed steadfast and unmovable in what I know God was. And today, even retired from that profession, many of them, I had one of them in a very high rank. I was down in Manhattan at One Police Plaza, and I heard, Meryl! I was like, well, who would be calling me like this in the middle of such an official capacity? And the woman said, who had a lot of breasts on her shirt too, she said, I want to let you know that I gave my life to Jesus on Easter Sunday. And there are many like that. So when we enclose ourselves in our spiritual realm and we don't have no friends because they know they're too dirty, or they're not living right, or they're full with sin, we can't be a witness. Thank you.
Yeah, but apart from not being a witness, is also the fact of how easily our own Christian church condemns us for having friends like those. So, I mean, we quickly cast people aside because of their association. I see a couple other people now. For some odd reason, Kelvin, I can't maneuver on my iPad here for some strange reason, so I can't see some of the chat. So can I ask Kelvin to jump on there and maybe identify comments that maybe have been placed on the chat, or we could ask certain persons who would have made comments on the chat to kind of expand on their comments. So Kelvin, you could do that?
Yes. We had a comment here. Let's see, there were several of them here. Let me see where I can go back to. Just kind of glancing here. Yeah. Ivan had one. Just making a reference. Yeah, okay. A sign in front of a church, come back to church, God is not on vacation. Kelvin Muhammad in Revelation chapter 5. Kelvin, would you mind expounding on what it is you were referencing here, if you don't mind?
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, basically, you read Revelation. Someone was asking, I think it was Lillian, about the Lamb and following the Lamb and overcoming inauthenticity through the nature of the Lamb. But when you read the scripture, especially Revelation chapter 5, where there's a throne set in the heavens and the 24 elders gather and all the saints, in the midst of the throne, there is a lamb. The lamb is slain. Now, everybody agrees, everybody knows that's a picture of Jesus Christ. It's a picture of his death, burial, and resurrection. And what's interesting to me is that God's throne represents the place from which he rules. It represents the place from which he administrates. Hence, I must conclude that God rules out of the nature and the finished work of the Lamb. So that, again, we see in Revelation where we conquer the beast. And again, let me explain. The beast here is not a literal beast, it's figurative. The whole book of Revelation is metaphorical. And this beast has the body of a lion, which is a picture of Babylon. He has part of his body looks like a bear, which is Medo-Persian Empire, and part of his body looks like a leopard. That is Alexander's Greco-Macedonian Empire, and he has feet, which represents the Roman Empire. In fact, he is an embodiment of that Daniel image. He comes out of the sea, which speaks of human confusion. And to me, this speaks of the mindset that exists in what we call this day or the last day. It's a confused mindset. It's the same thing that the demoniac of Gadara said, my name is Legion. In other words, I have so many identities that I don't know who I am. You see, it is utter confusion. But that the thing that redeems us out of this beast nature, out of this inauthentic lifestyle, is the nature of the Lamb, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. As I know it sounds simple, but you cannot have the kingdom without having the king first and having the nature of the king ruling inside of your heart. And I was on another call some time ago and pointing out that he has redeemed us from every kindred, tribe, and tongue. He has redeemed us from every nation. One version says he has redeemed us from every tribe, and he has redeemed us from every tongue. And we are divided today along lines of nations. We are divided along the lines of tribe, and we are divided along the lines of languages. And it is these points of division that exist. Where the blood of the Lamb touches, he has gone beyond the borders of our division, our divisiveness. Even as someone alluded to the Christian nationalism thing, here is a so-called Christian movement that's causing more division than unity. When Jesus says they will know you're Christians by your love. So it is a dichotomy. But in that context, let me say that, righteousness is not something that could be regulated. It's not something that a few guys with some black robes sitting as judges can determine. This is something that happens from the heart. This is the nature of the Lamb. The nature of the Lamb is the life of the Lamb that flows out of us. Those are my thoughts on that. I hope that helps somewhat.
Good, good.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure does. Thank you.
And anyone else on any comment again there? Let me ask you. There's no comment there. Let me ask a couple guys to kind of jump in here. Let me ask Leon, Elijah, out of South Africa. Leon is one of those kind of, I mean, like everyone else on this call, Leon is a very, very thoughtful kind of guy. Has a good perspective of kingdom realities, and I always welcome Leon's input. So Leon, if you're on the call, can I ask you to unmute and jump in there? Make a comment, contribution,
Thanks.
anything?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I think your illustration of the sons being sowed back into the world is really relevant. We've completely lost our directive because, like you so accurately put it, we've been put into the wall. We've been walled into this community of that completely has given us no relevance to the world. And I think even as we start to detox ourselves from Christian religion, we will start to feel we'll start to feel the flow of the Spirit again, because we've been so conditioned to talk in a particular way, and we have not learned the ways of the Chaldeans, like the way Daniel was so equipped. And so there's a real need for us as the sons of God to be sent. I mean, we are sent into the world. We're not sent into any other place. And when the Father does send us, once we have been prepared to put on display the nature and the character of God in our workplace and in our schools and in our neighborhoods, then we would start to see a real expression of the priesthood coming back to us. But it won't look, taste, or sound anything like what we've been used to. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Very good. You know, you put your finger on something there, you didn't expand on it, but the whole issue of the priesthood, something that if we had the time today, the main area of emphasis I was getting into was the whole issue of our peculiarity. And we're going to jump into that maybe next week and show the significance of our peculiarity and how that informs our authority. And I think it's an important point. Very, very important point. I like also the fact that you could say that we are ambassadors sent to the world. And as ambassadors in the world, like any person in the foreign services, if you are commissioned to a foreign soil and you are unaware, insensitive, have no knowledge of the world that you've been sent to, you can have your ambassador status recalled. And so in more ways than one, ambassadors we are inside of the world, but it's as though we are hiding away in an embassy, disconnected, not involved, not doing anything, and hoping that our responsibility to this environment will be fulfilled while we hide away in our little embassies. And so there is a need again for us to kind of re-examine the philosophy and our commission and see whether the two of them dynamically mesh. So excellent. Let me ask Lincoln. Lincoln is on the call here today. Lincoln is from Trinidad, and Lincoln is another one of those guys that I always value his input. He listens very attentively, and he kind of always measures. He's very measured in his comments, and so again, I always appreciate Lincoln's contribution. So, Link, let me give you the mic for a little bit.
Okay, I was thinking when you were ministering there that, you know, the system of the church as we know it tries to define who we are and tries to mold us. If we try to be anything different, we are not of the church. We're not following what the church does. And to be ourselves, our true selves, and be authentic in what we do, and to be giving the church or whoever listens to us the true word of God, and as we get it in our system. I began looking at your book on the gap of Christianity. I can't remember the proper name of it now. The gap between God and Christianity, and I was taken aback by our culture defines how we interpret a lot of things, and I never look at it that way. I know we always talk about whether we're from the States or the UK or whatever it is, and we have different cultures and things. But I think what God has done is that He has caused us to be ourselves, because we see things through where we were born, where we grew up, and therefore He's able to share things with people from a different perspective and bring them closer to Him with a greater understanding, while we may not share some values together because of our culture. But in the kingdom, we are in one kingdom, and our values should be what God has established in His word.
Beautiful, beautiful, excellent. I'm glad that you made reference to the book, The Gap Between God and Christianity. It's a book I recommended several weeks ago. I know some of you got it. I'm glad that you read it. I know that Ivan jumped into it, and Ivan really got quite a lot of nuance out of it. So maybe next week, Ivan, if you would be on the call, it would be good if you could kind of highlight some of the salient aspects of the book as you discovered it that might be beneficial to all of us. All right. So Ivan is on the call. I think he made a contribution, Kelvin told me, on the chat. But it would be good if Ivan could jump in there next week and give us some insight into what he discovered in the book. So thanks, Lincoln. Joel, you're the last person whose hand is up. I'm going to give you the mic, and I'm also going to turn the meeting back over to Kelvin Chambliss. So are you there? You're still there? You're gone.
Yes, I'm here. It's just to add to that last point, Andy. I think the view of being in the world and not of it is more internal disposition that we should have, which follows on by living immersed and inundated with the Spirit. Because I've always had this conflict ever since I was quite young, that the church I went to before, they would say something like, greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. And as a child, I really believed that with all my heart. And then they'll come in the next breath and say to me, spirits are transferable, and don't go near to this person because what he has on him will rub off on you. So then this thing that you say is so great in me is subject to this person's whatever it is in them. So it's like a sort of bipolar relationship. And that's all I wanted to add.
And that's true. I've heard so many of these. I've heard so much of those contradictory comments. On the one hand, where Paul's position was, you can't eat food offered to idols and all that kind of stuff. Paul talks about, listen, you don't want to offend your brother, the weaker brothers. But Paul said, you know what? It has no other God except one. So it has no such thing called food offered to idols. It doesn't exist, because from Paul's perspective, it only has one God. And so you cannot give something to a God that doesn't exist. So I could understand some of those contradictory comments. But just to kind of rehearse the points I wanted to drive home today, I didn't get into the sixth one. But the first point is breaking the talk shop model and building greater consensus, collaboration, and a spiritual commonwealth. We talked about how do we assume inner distinctiveness matched by outer ordinariness. And we talked about the whole issue of being hidden in plain sight and being like a real sleeper within the system. We talked about the urgent need for us to break the current model of insularity and exclusivity, and to see the kingdom between the narrowness of our own pigeonhole. We talked about the need to re-examine the issues of dominion and to avoid us building current-day Afghanistan's that in your mind looks like the kingdom. And the fourth principle we talk about is authenticity must become a more gravitational term in our world. And we looked at the root concept of auto-hentis, which means just be yourself. So We'll pick up on this next week. So good to have you on the call. Kelvin Mohammed, thanks, not Kelvin Mohammed, Kelvin Chambliss, thanks for hosting this call. Let me turn the mic back over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, everyone, for the comments that you've made to really bring strength to this conversation, perspective, widening the aperture of our sight through your comments and the way that you've shared and articulated. We really appreciate it. So we look forward to next week. We will get the recording out to you as soon as we can, as soon as it becomes available. Again, we thank you for joining us, and we look forward to continuing on our discussion next week. Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you and good night, everyone.